She looked me straight in the eye in my own living room and said, "This isn't your house." The words stung like a slap, but what she didn't know was that the deed, the mortgage, the years of hard work, all of it had my name written across it. Tell me, have you ever been told you don't belong in a place you built with your own hands? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear. Now, let's get straight into today's tale, where one daughter-in-law learned the hard way what ownership really means. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when the sunlight pours through the curtains and the smell of coffee lingers in the kitchen. I had been folding laundry, humming to myself, when I heard the front door open. My son and his wife walked in. They'd been married just a year, still settling into routines, still figuring out the rhythm of married life. I welcomed them with a smile. "Good to see you both," I said. But before I could ask how their weekend had been, my daughter-in-law, Emily, looked around the living room with narrowed eyes. "You know," she said casually, "you spend a lot of time here, but this really isn't your house anymore." Her words hit like ice water. I froze, laundry still in my hands. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shrugged, tossing her purse onto the couch. "Well, you live here, sure, but once we start taking over the payments, it'll be ours. That's how it works, right?" My son shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he could melt into the floor. "Emily," he muttered, but she kept going. "You've had your time here. Now it's ours. We'll probably redecorate, get rid of some of these old things." She waved a dismissive hand at the photographs on the wall, the furniture I'd saved for years to buy, the rug I'd chosen with such care. My heart thudded in my chest. I looked around the room, the very walls that had sheltered me through storms, the floorboards that had creaked beneath my children's first steps. And now this young woman, barely a year into the family, dared to call it hers. I wanted to lash out, to shout that she was wrong, but instead I stayed quiet. I folded the last shirt in my hands, laid it neatly on the pile, and let her words hang in the air. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, sometimes it's the space where plans begin to form. That evening, after they left, I sat at the kitchen table with the deed in my hands. My name stared back at me in black ink. This house wasn't just a place, it was my life's work. My husband and I had bought it together decades ago. We'd paid every bill, patched every leak, painted every wall. When he passed, the house became mine alone, a place where memories lived, where my roots ran deep. And no one, certainly not a daughter-in-law with a sharp tongue, was going to take that away from me. I knew then that Emily needed a lesson, not through yelling, not through arguing, but through proof. Quiet, undeniable proof. I folded the deed back into its envelope, tucked it away in my desk drawer, and whispered to myself, "One day soon, she'll see exactly whose house this is." The days that followed only deepened the sting of Emily's words. She didn't just say it once. She found little ways to remind me. One afternoon, she stopped by while my son was at work. I was watering the garden, kneeling in the soil where I'd planted roses 20 years ago. She leaned against the fence, arms crossed. "You spend so much time out here," she remarked. "When this is ours, I might rip these out. Too old-fashioned. I'm more of a modern landscaping kind of girl." Her tone was sweet, but the edge in her words cut sharp. I tightened my grip on the watering can. "These roses have been here since my children were small," I replied softly. "They've seen birthdays, graduations, and even my husband's last spring." She just shrugged. "Well, nothing lasts forever." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but instead of answering, I turned back to the flowers, sprinkling water over their roots. Some things didn't need defending with words. They spoke for themselves. Another time, she wandered into the living room while I was dusting. She tapped a picture frame holding a black and white photo of my wedding day. "You know," she said, "this house could use a new look. Fresh paint. Maybe new furniture? Out with the old, in with the new. I looked at her carefully. That's a lovely idea. For your own home. The way her smile faltered told me she understood the message, but she pressed on anyway. Well, soon enough, this will be ours, and then we'll make it right. She walked away, humming to herself, leaving me with a storm of emotions. The hardest part wasn't her words. It was my son's silence. He never joined in, but he never stopped her either. When I confronted him gently, asking why he let her speak that way, he just sighed. Mom, she doesn't mean it. She just wants to feel included. Don't take it so seriously. But I knew better. Words plant seeds, and the seeds Emily was planting could grow into something poisonous if I didn't pull them up by the roots. That night I pulled out the envelope again. The deed. My name. Proof that this house, every wall, every window was mine. I thought about confronting her right then, waving the paper in her face. But something in me said no. That would be too easy, too soon. If I really wanted the lesson to sink in, she needed to feel it, to be humbled in a way she couldn't laugh off. So I waited. Patience has a power of its own. It allows arrogance to build until the fall hurts just enough to be remembered. And sure enough, Emily gave me my moment. It came one evening when we were all sitting around the table, my son, Emily, and me. Dinner was nearly finished when Emily leaned back in her chair, glass of wine in hand, and said with a smirk, "You know, when this is finally ours, I think I'll knock down that wall in the kitchen. Open the place up. It'll be perfect." The room went still. My son cleared his throat nervously. I looked at Emily, her face glowing with the confidence of someone who thought she had already won. I set down my fork, folded my hands, and smiled. "Funny you should say that," I told her gently, "because there's something I'd like to show you." Her eyebrows rose, curiosity flickering. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, her illusion of ownership would come crashing down. Emily leaned forward in her chair, smirk still painted across her face. "Something to show me?" she asked, her tone playful, almost mocking. I rose slowly, walked into the study, and came back holding a large envelope. I set it on the table with deliberate care. "What's this?" she asked. "The truth," I replied softly. My son shifted uncomfortably, his fork clinking against his plate. "Mom," he murmured, unsure where this was going. But I stayed calm, sliding the papers from the envelope and laying them flat on the table. "This," I said, tapping the first page, "is the deed to this house, bought and paid for by your father-in-law and me, years before you even met my son. And this," I held up the second document, "is the updated record in my name alone, after he passed." Emily's smirk faltered. She leaned closer, scanning the paper as though hoping to find a mistake. "It can't still be under your name," she insisted. "Dan said—" My son interrupted quickly, his face pale. "Emily, I never said that. I told you this was Mom's house. We just live here with her." The silence that followed was heavy. Emily's confidence drained, replaced by a flicker of panic. Her cheeks flushed. She looked at me, then at my son, as though searching for a lifeline. "You mean," she stammered, "we don't own any of this?" I folded the deed back into the envelope with care. "No, you don't. Every wall, every floorboard, every brick. You're standing in my house, and I've been patient, listening to your comments, letting you feel bold enough to say things you shouldn't. But today, I think it's time you understood the truth." Her mouth opened, then shut again. She looked like a child caught misbehaving, unsure whether to argue or apologize. My son rubbed his temples, sighing. "Emily, I told you not to push this." I looked at her directly, my tone calm but firm. "You may be my daughter-in-law, and I welcomed you into this family with open arms. But family doesn't mean erasing history. Family doesn't mean disrespecting the very foundation that gave you a place to stand." She shifted in her chair, her bravado slipping away. I I didn't realize, she muttered, her voice small. No, I said gently. You didn't want to realize. You thought if you spoke boldly enough it would become true. But life doesn't work that way. For the first time since she had entered this house, Emily had no clever words, no snide remarks, just silence. The lesson had landed. Dinner ended quietly after that. The air was different, thick with realization, heavy with humility. Emily barely touched her food, her once bright confidence dimmed to a shadow. My son caught between us, tried to lighten the mood with small talk, but the evening had already shifted. As I collected the plates, I felt no anger, just relief. Relief that the line had finally been drawn, that the truth had been spoken aloud in a way that couldn't be twisted. That night, as they left, Emily turned at the door. Her eyes didn't meet mine, but her voice was softer. Good night. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the wall she had built around her arrogance. And I knew in time those walls would crumble completely. Because nothing speaks louder than proof. And she had just read it with her own eyes. The days after that dinner felt different. The house itself seemed quieter, calmer, almost as if the walls knew the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Emily didn't show up as often. When she did, her tone was different, measured, careful, stripped of the sharp edges that once cut so easily. She no longer tossed her purse on the couch or waved dismissively at my furniture. Instead, she sat politely, almost timidly, her hands folded in her lap. The first time she returned, she glanced around the living room and said softly, "Dinner smells nice." Not much, but a far cry from chicken again? Or this is old-fashioned? I nodded politely. Thank you. My son, on the other hand, seemed weighed down by guilt. One evening, as he helped me carry in groceries, he sighed, "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I should have stopped her from saying those things." I looked at him, my heart softening. You love her. You didn't want to cause conflict. I understand. Still, he shook his head. No, you deserve better. Dad would have never let her talk to you that way. I reached out, touched his arm gently. Your father isn't here, but I am, and I know how to stand my ground. That night, I slept with an ease I hadn't felt in months. For too long, I'd let Emily's words sit heavy on me, like stones in my chest. Now those stones had been lifted, replaced by the steady weight of the deed tucked safely in my drawer, the undeniable reminder that I had nothing to prove. But Emily wasn't done learning. A week later, we were all gathered for Sunday dinner. The whole family this time, grandkids, cousins, laughter spilling through the house. Emily sat at the table, quiet, while I brought out the main dish. As I set it down, one of the younger cousins piped up, "This house is so big. Who owns it?" The room fell silent for a moment. All eyes flicked toward me. And then Emily, her cheeks flushing, cleared her throat. "She does," she said quickly, her voice low. "It's her house." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but those 3 words carried more weight than any apology could. My son squeezed her hand under the table, proud of her, relieved she'd finally spoken the truth aloud. And though she didn't look at me directly, I saw it in her posture, in the way she lowered her head. She had learned. The rest of the evening passed easily. The tension that had once hung like a cloud began to lift. The children played, stories were shared, and laughter returned to its rightful place. Later, as I stood at the sink washing dishes, I caught Emily watching me. For the first time, her eyes weren't defiant or dismissive. They were thoughtful, almost humbled. She stepped closer, drying a plate I handed her. "I didn't understand before," she said quietly. "But I do now." I spoke out of turn. "This house, it means something, more than I knew." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply nodded. "I'm glad you see that. Because sometimes respect isn't demanded. It's earned, through patience, through truth, through the strength to stand when others try to push you down. That night, as the last guest left and the house settled again into silence, I looked around the living room, the walls lined with photographs, the furniture worn with love. It was mine, and finally everyone knew it. That night, long after the family left and the house had fallen quiet, I sat alone in the living room. The lamp cast a soft glow on the photographs along the mantel, snapshots of weddings, graduations, birthdays, ordinary days that had become precious memories. For years, this house had been my anchor. It wasn't just bricks and beams. It was where my husband and I built a life, where we raised our children, where love and hardship were woven into every wall. And yet, with just a few careless words, Emily had tried to strip all that away, to make me feel like a guest in my own home. But the deed had spoken louder than any argument. The ink on those pages and the history behind them carried the truth in a way no smug remark ever could. I thought about how easily respect can be overlooked in families. Sometimes the younger generation forgets that the ground they walk on was paved by someone else's sweat. They see walls and furniture, but not the sacrifices that brought them here. And maybe Emily wasn't cruel at heart. Maybe she was just young, eager to carve out her own place, blind to the roots already planted beneath her feet. But that didn't excuse the way she dismissed me. And it certainly didn't change the fact that some lessons have to be learned the hard way. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. For months, I'd let her words gnaw at me, second-guessing myself, shrinking quietly in my own space. But tonight had shifted that balance. She had seen the truth. My son had seen it too. And perhaps, most importantly, I had remembered it. Because sometimes we forget our own worth until someone tries to take it away. In the days that followed, I noticed little changes. Emily spoke softer, with more care. She asked questions instead of making declarations. She lingered in the kitchen while I cooked, even offering to help. And though she didn't say the word sorry, her actions spoke enough. One afternoon, as we sat together folding laundry, she picked up one of my husband's old shirts. "He must have loved this house," she said quietly. I looked at her, surprised by the gentleness in her voice. "He did. He poured his life into it. We both did." She nodded slowly, her hands smoothing the fabric. "I see that now." That simple sentence carried more weight than all the mockery she had once thrown my way. It wasn't about winning or proving her wrong. It was about reclaiming my place, reminding her and reminding myself that the life I built had value, that I had value. And as I stood by the window that evening, watching the sun dip low and paint the house in gold, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. No one would ever make me feel like a stranger in my own home again. Because this house wasn't just where I lived. It was a reflection of who I was, of the love and labor poured into it. And now, finally, everyone understood that. So here's what I learned. Respect isn't something you ask for with raised voices or angry words. It's something you affirm quietly, with truth that can't be denied. My daughter-in-law thought she could erase me with one careless remark. "This isn't your house." But the papers told another story, and the walls themselves carried the proof of a lifetime's work. Sometimes people need to be reminded that history matters, that roots matter, and that the sacrifices of those before them deserve more than mockery. She walked away humbled, and I walked away with peace. Tell me, have you ever had to remind someone of your worth in a way they couldn't ignore? Share it in the comments, and stay with us. There are many more stories where justice finds its voice.